Now, Overwatch is a very complex game that is always changing, and if you're a brand new player, it can feel pretty daunting to try to pick it up for the first time. That's why in this video, the ultimate beginner's guide for Overwatch, you're gonna learn everything you need to set yourself up for a successful grind. But if you want to learn more about Overwatch and constantly get better at the game, definitely smash that subscribe button because we release tons of consistent guides that are gonna help you improve. But let's jump into the video. Now, if you are true new, like actually you haven't really played Overwatch at all, then I would suggest you just go play, have fun. Don't worry about getting too good right now. Oftentimes you're going to learn a lot of things through just trial and error and learning in a game. So yes, definitely press that subscribe, but go grind the game a bit first. Come back here once you have settled in a bit. I don't want to ruin this golden window of Overwatch, I would say, where you're really kind of just experiencing the game. And yeah, don't mess with that all too much. But after that phase, let's start to define things you need to know about Overwatch and what they mean for you. So first off, we have the roles, and specifically there are three major roles: DPS, tank, and support. DPS, or damage per second, is a role of characters that are primarily created to deal damage and get kills, right? Seems pretty self-evident by the name, but it's important to understand that a DPS's job is to oftentimes fight other DPS, control angles, or even hunt enemy supports or other characters. DPS have a role passive in which they don't take damage for a given amount of time. I'm being intentionally vague here because this number often changes up or down, but it's definitely something that if you're not fighting for a while, you're going to gain your health back. And DPS are also going to have the ability to minimize the amount of healing an enemy can take if you deal damage to them for a certain amount of seconds. So doing damage constantly to targets are going to make them harder to heal. So it's either going to allow you to secure kills easier, or it's going to force the enemy away from that area or position. And that's really valuable, but we'll talk more about that later. Next up, we do have the tank, and tanks are the bread and butter of Overwatch. There is only one tank on a team, and it's the character that is going to be able to take on damage and cooldowns and still survive, right? They're going to be able to get shot and not die instantly. They're going to be able to eat a cooldown or an ability and not die instantly. And this is because of a combination of several factors. Typically, tanks have more health totals by far than DPS and supports, meaning that they could take just a lot more damage and not just fall over. They typically also have armor, which is a type of overhealth, which is actually going to mitigate damage coming into them until the armor is removed, so that makes them even harder to kill. And they also have a combination of abilities that will keep them alive, whether that means shields, some sort of damage mitigation, or something to gain back health or shields at a moment's notice. Now, not all of this is completely unique to tank, but it is important that the core job of a tank is the ability to enter into enemy territory and not just fall over and die immediately. We call this space the contested space of two teams. A tank can occupy that and not die. Most other characters, they're too fragile, they're too weak in health. If they're not playing near direct cover, they will take damage and probably just fall over and die. So that's the tank's role, and it's typically the character that all other characters on your team play around and optimize around. Now, last but certainly not least, we have to talk about support. And supports are rather unique in the fact that they have the ability to heal consistently. Other characters in other roles can heal somewhat. You talk about Soldier 76 and his heal station. He can definitely heal, but supports can do it at a consistent rate, and it's a core part of their kit. It's one of the main ways that they are going to impact the game. But it's also important to understand that a support is going to have many more resources and abilities to get value outside of healing. So for example, most supports can deal damage, and oftentimes supports can deal a good amount of damage, not as much as their DPS counterparts, but it's a substantial amount that needs to be respected and utilized if you're playing as support. In addition to that, supports have some of the most powerful bits of utility in the game, whether you're speeding your team in and giving them a community speed boost, or you're resurrecting a falling teammate and bringing them back to life. There's a lot of super powerful bits of utility in this role that can get value outside of just simply healing people up. Now, similar to the DPS, supports are also going to be able to get heals if they're out of combat for a certain amount of time, not taking any damage. And notably also tanks, even though their passive is often changing, they don't get affected by crowd control or a sort of stun as much as the other roles. But we'll break down that in a little bit more detail later. Now, we've referenced abilities a little bit previously, but let's talk about the difference between passive and active abilities. Active abilities are going to be things that you use and then they go on a cooldown, and every cooldown is going to be different. But a huge part of getting better at Overwatch is not only using your abilities well, but managing your cooldowns and understanding when you have an ability available and what it costs to put that ability on a cooldown, because for that time frame, you can't use it, and if you need it, you're gonna be a little bit screwed. Now, for passive abilities, these are things that are triggered without you directly activating them. And different characters have different amounts of passive abilities. Some characters are going to be able to climb walls when they just walk towards a wall. And technically, they can't climb walls infinitely, so it's not like there isn't any cooldown, but there's a sort of internal cooldown that only activates once they have climbed a wall, or there's set conditions when the passive can be active. But basically, some characters are going to be able to get value basically automatically or without the need of tying it to a cooldown. So it's important to understand the distinction. Next up, we do got to talk about ultimates, and ultimates are things that you're going to be earning either one through time. You do earn ultimates slowly without doing anything at all. You're also going to be able to earn ultimates through damage, or you're going to be able to earn ultimates through healing people. But overall, ultimates are going to take quite a bit of time in order to generate. It's going to be different for every character, but these are powerful abilities, basically, that you're only going to be able to use every once in a while. But all ultimates are different. Some of them are going to be very aggressive or trying to deal damage or get kills. Others are going to be crowd control, where they're going to stun enemies in a certain position, and it's going to be easier for you to deal damage to them or push an objective. Or they're going to be some ultimates that are very defensive, or they're made to try to protect your team from oncoming damage or in the middle of a team fight. Now, ultimates are so strong that they can decide entire games based on how you use them. So at a simple basic strategy, knowing how to use your ultimate and when to use your ultimate is something that is going to dramatically separate you from a person that is using their ultimate randomly or without a true purpose. Now, last up in the character section, we're going to talk about choosing a main. And first off, if you're really new, I would suggest you play every single role and at least try every character just for a little bit. We're not going to try to box you into something before you really know what you want to play. But then after you get a taste of everyone, I would literally just say pick the characters that you think are cool. Don't worry about viability or meta. You could play any character all the way up to the highest ranks of play. So really just look and see what you find fascinating, what you find interesting. In order to get good at a character, you're going to have to play that character a ton. So really try to just find some of the characters that you personally think are effing cool and pick some of those up and start grinding them. Now, next up, we do gotta talk about the game state. And first off, we do have to mention maps. That being said, the maps that you can play are gonna be dependent on the mode. And there are a lot of modes in Overwatch. There are some that you're going to find really familiar to other games, like Escort, where you're escorting a payload, or King of the Hill, where you're trying to capture an objective and keep enemies off of it. But there's also some more untraditional game modes like Flashpoint, but really, you're just gonna have to learn these by playing them. I could break down them in specific detail here, but it's not really going to resonate until you get a lot of reps in. No amount of explaining is going to help you understand exactly what the game modes are or how they feel to play. So just know that maps are assigned to modes, and if you're going to play a certain map, you're going to also play a certain mode on that map. But really, an important part of getting better at Overwatch is starting to learn maps. Not only identifying where to find health packs, there are both small and larger health packs, one giving you a small bump of health, and the other one healing you all the way to full. Knowing where these locations are, knowing flank routes, and just generally being able to navigate the map without getting lost is something that is going to be a bit of a learning curve for Overwatch, but this is true for pretty much any FPS game, and it's just going to be something you're going to have to play through. Now, it is important to understand that there are certain metas that exist on maps. While I do specifically stand by not caring what the meta is or not playing any sort of meta because it just doesn't apply to 99% of players, it is a good game sense exercise to understand why some maps favor some characters and some maps favor others. For example, a map that has a really large sightline, like Havana, is going to automatically favor characters that can be effective from a long distance away. We're talking about tanks like Sigma, snipers like Widowmaker and Hanzo, and characters that can generally fight from a longer distance. These characters are still going to be effective because they can be effective when there's huge gaps between one piece of cover to the next. But you look at another map that is really close together, another map that doesn't have these long angles, and all of a sudden, a character that is more of a melee character, or a character that is effective at more closer ranges, or maybe even flanking can be more viable. And starting to think about these things can help you better understand Overwatch as a whole, because there's a lot of characters that are very map specific in their strength, and understanding that at the very least can allow you to change how you play depending on what areas of maps you're playing on and on what character. Now, we also do got to talk about objectives on certain maps. There are going to be different objectives depending on the mode you're playing, but there are certain objectives that you need to capture, where there's either ticks that you need to acquire or whole objectives that you need to control for a certain amount of time before you capture it fully. And even though a lot of times the objective, or the true objective, is pushing that payload or capturing that objective, what's most important is winning what we call team fights. I've referenced this several times in this video, but to explain what a team fight is, this is when one team fully fights against another and one team ends out on top with only a couple of players. Because you got to understand, to capture an objective, only one person needs to be alive. The last person standing will be the one to secure that objective or push that payload further. So if you prioritize pushing an objective over winning a fight, and then the enemy team kills you, you didn't really capture that objective. And it's important to understand that winning a fight is oftentimes the best way to fully secure your actual objective in the long run, even if it might not be the most obvious short-term decision. Now, I don't want to get overcomplicated here, but the simple thing to think about as far as objectives are concerned is the difference between temporary progress and locked-in progress. So there's going to be certain core objectives on the map that once you get there, it's going to change the spawn points for both teams, and it's going to secure a point for you that cannot be erased. That would be a locked-in form of progress. And these are more important than just small progress. For example, an escort push, getting it from 10 meters to 30 meters, that doesn't really matter. But getting it to an objective that changes the spawn points of your team, that's a locked-in piece of progress, and that matters far more. So you can identify what objectives matter more or less, and it's something to consider. Now, there are some notable and important factors you should consider about Overwatch that make it quite a bit unique compared to many other games. First off, Overwatch is a movement shooter, as in, you can jump around and still be accurate, you can run full force and still be accurate, you could be midair and still be accurate. So understanding that, it's a core difference when you compare it to games like Valorant that make it so if you move at all, you're going to be grossly inaccurate. Also, Overwatch is a team-based game, 5v5, and a lot of different characters and roles do different things. This means Overwatch is more team-centric than many other games that exist on the market. And especially when we talk about shooters, many shooters kind of fall into the camp where you can carry and pop off by yourself. And while you can do that to an extent in Overwatch, there's a huge team aspect about teammates being on the same page, everyone accomplishing their specific role's goals, and trying to unify to accomplish the objective. Now, I can't promise you'll actually get this in your games, but I will say that when played in a scrim or private environment where you have teams that practice together and play consistently together against other teams, you're going to be able to play a pure form of a shooter that you really can't find in many other games. The last notable factor I'll tell you about Overwatch is at its core not an FPS shooter, but a resource exchange game that is more similar to games that are like MOBAs or even MMOs. Mechanical skill and your ability to aim definitely matter, but there is also an equal importance in exchanging abilities and ultimates with the enemy team and trying to come out on top. Understanding that it's a resource exchange between both teams, that depending on how you play, you're going to be able to conserve resources or you're going to need to demand more. As an example, you're playing in a bad position. If you're going to survive in a bad position that is outside of cover in the enemy territory, it's going to demand a lot of resources to keep you alive. Your teammates are going to have to heal you. You're going to have to use lots of abilities. Maybe you'll even require health totals from your team to come and help you and peel for you in that situation. But if you're playing in a good position, you can conserve resources. You could save them for optimal situations, and understanding that a team that is constantly demanding resources and wasting them versus the team that is constantly conserving resources and using them only when it's most optimal, you can really easily see which team will come out on top pretty much no matter what. Next off, let's talk about competitive and ranked. Now, in order to play ranked, you're going to need 50 match wins in casual play, and I wouldn't necessarily be in a rush to play ranked, especially if you're just learning. Start going through the motions. Don't just try to get to ranked as quickly as possible. There'll be plenty of time to play ranked. Just really play and grind your games. And then when you have ranked, you can lock it in whenever you want. Now, keep in mind there are going to be separate ranks per role. And this really means that if you want to, you can grind each role separately and have a different skill set on those roles, or maybe you have a main role and then roles you play with your friends, and that role won't be matched to your main role, and you won't have to worry about losing on that role dropping down your main rank. Now, you're going to hear a term called hidden MMR or matchmaking rank. Basically, what this is your rank behind the scenes. So you're going to have a visible rank, but you're also going to have a rank behind the scenes that only Blizzard knows that they think you belong. So sometimes that lines up perfectly and they think you belong exactly where you are, but sometimes because you've been playing really well, you're actually presumed to be better than you actually are, or worse. And based on how you play from then on out, it's going to recalibrate. So if you're constantly winning and winning and winning and winning nonstop, then your MMR is going to shoot quite a bit above your current rank, because the internal system thinks that you actually deserve a higher rank. And if you keep winning, you're going to be rewarded relative to that with extra amounts of rank that are going to be added to your rank every single time you win. So understand that there are both internal systems that are tracking your stats and the way you're playing, and then a visible system that shows you exactly what rank you are, but it's really just trying to identify where you belong, and if you consistently prove it wrong, you'll get to whatever rank you want to. But really, this system is primarily made to make sure that people don't get stuck in ranks they don't belong, or Smurfs don't ruin a ton of games when they're playing on alt accounts, for instance. Now, I know it's really easy to obsess about your rank, but I promise you, do not obsess about your rank at the start. I do understand that getting better is what a lot of people want to do, and I wanted the same thing. I was someone that started in silver, and it took me forever to get out of silver and gold and plat, and I finally did, but I can promise you that worrying overly about rank, especially at the start, is really gonna only have you worrying about the wrong things. You're gonna kind of bypass your development a little bit and expect yourself to be better than you really are right away. It's only gonna set up unrealistic expectations. Now, the last category, we do need to talk about big mistakes that especially new players fall into that can prevent you from getting better, or they can just be little traps that you have to be looking out for. And I want to kind of give a PSA here. So first off is tier lists, and it's kind of interesting because I make a lot of tier lists. I make tons of tier lists. It's probably one of the videos that I make the most, and I do it for several reasons. One, it gets views, but also they're interesting and fun to talk about. But you'll find a lot of newer players that will watch tier lists and just pick whatever is the flavor of the month. But you got to understand that a tier list based on a specific rank is almost impossible. There can be little tips and tricks of characters to pick at certain ranks because they're effective and easy to get value out of, but especially when you look at most tier lists, they're based on optimal play at higher ends, optimal synergy, optimal teamwork, optimal mechanics, and you're just not going to find that until you get to the highest ranks of play. So a character that is really, really great on a tier list might not be great for you, and Overwatch is such a complex game that you can succeed on any character. So watch tier lists and learn about the game and learn what is good at the highest ranks of play and why certain characters are better and worse than they used to be. This is all great, but do not make a tier list your gospel. Do not use a tier list to decide what you're going to pick in any given season. I promise you that's the bad way to go about it. And if you truly get good at a character, you want to be able to play that character regardless of how good they are in the current meta. You want to be able to play that character in any meta and still succeed. So keep those things in mind. Another thing that I would say can be a mistake a bit is unranked to GMs. And I don't hate on unranked to GMs or anything, but I would say that they're more entertainment than educational. If you're going to watch an unranked to GM, it can be somewhat helpful to see how someone climbed through your rank on the main that you want to play. But it's also important to understand that oftentimes the people that are doing unranked to GMs have such high level of a mechanical skill that they get to kind of ignore many of the fundamental rules that someone with a reasonable level of mechanical skill would have to follow. They're brute forcing their way through, so to speak. I don't mean that you can't learn things from it, but it is important to make sure that you're not just trying to copy one-to-one what they're doing to what you're doing. It's another way to set yourself up for failure. Last off, Overwatch is incredibly complex, and you should not expect yourself to learn the game very quickly. I am constantly learning new things about this game, and I've been playing it for freaking 6 years as a coach, watching millions of VOD reviews, not millions, but, you know, thousands of VOD reviews, and Overwatch is a game that is going to be harder to master than many of the games that you have played. I think it's one of the hardest games to master, period, and it's definitely a game that you need to keep an open mind, don't assume you know everything, and constantly be willing to learn if you want to get good for the long haul in this game. But anyways, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me down below, and do me a huge solid and smash that subscribe, because I'm going to be outputting a lot of content that's going to help you get better, and you can learn the game that much quicker. But anyways, thank you so much for coming by. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.